we have, I really like the streams, would like to know what you think of my model. I'd like to get critique on hair and a better way of going about it. I have several subtools that I used for different variations and uses. I noticed that. My current face is a combined subtool of all the facial elements. Then I used the move brush to get the face looking a bit closer to the reference overall, and any other critique would be appreciated. My end goal is to make a low poly texture, low poly model textured in Substance, and polish up and render in Marmoset or something. Awesome. Well, I'm going to go through, because it's going to be a lot easier for me to work on this if we only have in what I actually need to look at. It looks like you have a bunch of different attempts on the hair, so I think I kind of see like a theme here, so we'll talk about that and some of the things that you can do. I'm going to turn off all your poly paint so we can actually look at the three-dimensional form and some of the stuff that we can kind of change and correct here. So let me just reassess what you had here. The face, just general stuff. So mainly the hair, it looks like. So mainly the hair and some of the face. So that's about all we got here. So I think that'll be fine. Let's go ahead and talk about your hair first, since that was the first thing that you mentioned. So when creating hair from geometry, when you're trying to create form that represents hair, it's tough. Hair is tough. And trust me, I understand that. I get that. But what I want you to do is go into Photoshop or Paint, you know, whatever you want to use, GIMP, whatever you end up using, and start blocking out the major shapes of your hair and outlining them and separating them up into different meshes, different pieces of geometry. So we have like this one large strand here that kind of wraps down and around the face. We have a smaller strand here. Looks like there's another one and maybe some other pieces that wrap down and out and around out here. So there's quite a few of these that we'd want to split up into separate pieces of geometry to represent this form a little bit better. I'll use this front chunk as our example here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my select lasso, because you already have geometry in here. It'd be a waste of time for me to, you know, create a new tube of geometry. But if you have never used the cube tube snap brush or cube tube or any of the curve brushes before, essentially they allow you to create a tube of geometry. If you're unfamiliar with how to work with curves, there's some great tutorials I'm sure that you can find online, including on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for the follow, whomever that was. Bass Das Lee, thank you, appreciate it. So what I want you to do, if you are wanting to go the route of using the cube tube brush or any kind of curve brush for your basic hair form, go into your stroke menu, turn on size, this is under curve modifiers, and just go from a larger to a smaller curve, and then you can just draw out that shape, and voila, you have a tube to start working on. Some other tips for working with insert brushes: you can lower your Z intensity to squash geometry. So if you want a little bit of a more thin piece, which is what we got there, you can do that. And then your draw size simply just controls the scale of that piece of geometry. Again though, you already have some stuff in here, so I'm just going to use that. I'm going to use the selection lasso and just select that first major chunk. I'll get rid of all that excess. We don't need any of that. And beautiful, we have this. I'm going to turn on double so I can see the backside polys. I'm going to split that off. So now I have two pieces of geometry. I'm just going to Dynamesh this, much like what you have done here. It's going to close holes and make this just a little bit easier to work on. So it looks like you've Dynameshed a lot of this hair. I would recommend for blocking out, I think that's fine, but once you get past the block out phase, then it's time to start splitting up the hair, much like what I've done here. So I'd say you're probably in a stage or close to the stage where you would want to start doing that. In terms of accuracy to the hair, the reason why I mentioned going into like Photoshop or something to sit here and block out the different forms is because your major forms are not exactly matching what we're seeing here. And that paired with you're missing a lot of the shapes that I'm kind of seeing like coming down and wrapping around the face. So we just to get closer to accuracy and try to understand our character and the shapes that we see a little bit better, I think kind of reassessing some of this here will help you out quite a bit. So take the time to pre-plan and really look that over and get a little bit closer to that. Then what I recommend doing is after you have your chunks of geometry matching this a lot better and they're all kind of dynameshed, I would just Z-remesh these really low. For example, I'm remeshing this front piece down to 0.1. It's the lowest possible value that you can get out of auto Z-remeshing, other than like using half a couple times. But after you have that, again, Z-remesher, geometry Z-remesh, if you don't know where that is or haven't used that before. Then you got something really low. You could also create these tubes of hair of geometry in another application if you feel more comfortable doing that. But really the main thing here is that we just focus on accuracy. So as this like goes down to the tip, whoops, didn't mean to do that. I'm seeing that this is changing directions down here. So that's something that I really want to pay attention to. So we're coming down across the face and wrapping up into a point. This kind of frames the face a little bit more, is a little bit more flat, and it doesn't really go below the nose. If I were to draw a straight line out here across our character's face, from bottom of eye to bottom of eye, I can see where that tip of the hair is. If I look at this, yours is quite a bit lower. So let's get a little bit more accurate to the character. That is just one example of some of the proportional changes that we would like to make here. I think just reassessing a lot of this will help you in that as well, though. And then let's just kind of look at this from multiple directions. It's like wrapping around her face this way, and then it looks like it's maybe kind of rotating and going forward, so it's got like a little bit of an S curve there, from what I can tell from the image, just the way the light's hitting that. So take some time to do that. And then after you get to a point where I'm not going to spend the time to like sit here and make this perfect, but after you do spend the time and get this perfect, add in some subdivision levels and then start experimenting with some different brushes. If you already have a hairbrush that you like to do with texture and it looks like you might not have something that you super enjoy using, but after you get the shape down, maybe try using something like the damn standard brush with lazy mouse on, and maybe like a really low Z intensity, and start kind of working on getting some texture in there. Start playing around with some of the shapes. If you use a really big brush, you can start getting some really cool kind of like plane changes and stuff like that in. There's all sorts of different stuff that you can do here. But just experiment with it. I recommend for this kind of stage, definitely use something like Lazy Mouse. But yeah, start kind of pushing further on this after you get to that stage. But I recommend that you spend a lot more time working on the basic shape of your hair than you have done currently. Start splitting it up into these separate pieces of geometry like I've done here. We've got something nice and clean and simple. Plus it gives you something low poly, so if you end up kind of, I think you mentioned that you would do something in Marmoset later on, so you can have some low poly chunks of hair already ready to go, already ready, so that you can, you know, bake your textures and everything else later on for that. Cool, cool, cool. So that would be my recommendation for your hair. For your character's face, let's see. Let's just hide a bunch of this stuff. Take a gander. Got a mask on here, so I'd be careful. Make sure, get rid of that extra mask. I can tell that you used that as an extraction for the shirt here, which is a great method for extracting some quick clothing or something like that. So, a few things that I would mention. You're lacking a lot of the facial structure that we would like to see for this character. If we look at kind of the bony landmarks of the jaw, we're just kind of rounding out and missing a lot of that down here. Kind of like the area around the eye socket, you have this kind of tilting forward on the bottom, which is making the eyes feel like they're kind of like flipped up, whereas we more so want the opposite effect, where they're kind of pressed a little bit more forward on the top side than the bottom. If you draw out a straight line like so, your top lid is always going to hit before the bottom. You're just kind of lacking some depth here in the eyes, and you know, you've created these in a very interesting way, just using some geometry to kind of represent some of the different form and highlights there. What I would recommend, though, instead of kind of doing this kind of floating piece, I would recommend creating an actual sphere for an eyeball. I think you can use... I don't know how this character works, and I'm guessing that this character's eyes do not work this way. Based on what I can see in the image, it doesn't look like they do. And maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But I would recommend trying to use an eyeball. It's going to help you fix a lot of the shape around your eyelid, which right now feels very flat. And like I said, a lot of the hits and breaks here just aren't happening in the correct place. So the eyes and the kind of bony landmarks of the eye cavity and brow feel very undefined, so that's something that I would revisit. Again, the jawline, and be careful with your lips as you start to kind of create this shape. You know, some stuff is getting like really pushed in and dipped in here. It's creating some awkward shadows, so that's definitely something that I would reassess the lips for sure. And the shape of your nose is just feeling a little bit, you know, too rounded and not planed out enough. So I think in general, I would say there's quite a few things here that need to have their planes defined a bit better. Think about bony landmarks. Think about areas at which a surface turns. So looking at the jaw, for instance, we got this jawline here kind of wrapping down and coming up. So we want to kind of form that up a little bit better and play around with that. So we're not just getting this kind of like straight from cheek to cheek wrap around the lower portion of the head. I think that'll help you out quite a bit in moving forward with this character. But she does have a pointed jaw. I think just kind of reassessing, like I said, maybe looking up some planes of the head to kind of start pushing forward on that. I think, I don't want to say you've bit off more than you can chew here, but I think just kind of reassessing those major shapes will help you out. And just, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. What I would really focus on is just quantity over quality at this stage. If you're trying to like really push forward on the shapes of this head, it might be a good idea to do a couple studies, maybe spend like a month just trying to block out shapes of the head really quick, trying to focus on just the planes of the head, looking at as much reference as you possibly can, and just trying to keep it as low poly as you can. I think that might help push you kind of to the next level to where you could accomplish something like this at a much higher level than currently what we see. But that's what I would say on the face. Again, kind of looking back at the hair, start splitting that up into some different shapes, thinking about getting some low poly tubes in there. I think that'll help you out a lot. Same thing in the face. I think you should remesh this. I think this is going to be really tough to work on when it's just Dynameshed. So if you're unfamiliar with using some of the auto topology remeshing tools in ZBrush, which it looks like maybe you have a little bit of experience in, it's hard for me to tell. It looks like maybe you did it here on the body, but definitely do that on the face and hair, and I think that's it. I think that'll get you headed in a good direction. But good luck to you, and I look forward to seeing the next step in the process.